new innovation project Pixelvetica, on which he will inform us today during his talk, Pixelvetica, the state of play of video game preservation in Switzerland. The stage is yours. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Melanie. Hi, everyone, and thank you for the invitation. So, yes, I will be talking about the project we have in Switzerland called Pixelvetica, which is about the preservation of Swiss video games. The first important aspect is that a few years ago, in 2015, the federal state released a report about the importance of video games in Switzerland and as an industry. And in this report, so the report was in 3 languages, was translated in 3 languages. There is a specific mention of the fact that preservation of cultural works should be taken into account, and video games as cultural works should be preserved, and work should be done to think about preserving those games. And as always in Switzerland, it took a bit of time, and a few years afterwards, Memoriav, which is the, let's say, the Association for the Preservation of Audiovisual Heritage, was looking into what's the state of video game preservation in Switzerland? Is there anything happening in Switzerland? And is there anything happening in other countries? What's the situation, and what should be the approach for the coming years in Switzerland? So basically, that was we had a small grant to work on this, but almost the whole team was working. The money was going to the institutions. So I will present the team. But yeah, there was a small grant to give some money to the institutions, but everyone who worked on the project is basically volunteering for this project. Just to explain the name of the project, so obviously Pixelvetica, it's Pixel plus Helvetica, and Helvetica is a very important concept in Switzerland, is the fact that the work is Swiss in a way. So Helvetica means that it's related to Switzerland, so it could be made by Swiss people, it could be something related to Switzerland as a country, as the geography, and so it's very open. And obviously, it's a scale. So you have obvious Helvetica games or Helvetica works in movies, for example, or you have a minor works that are related to Switzerland. So Helvetica is the core concept of a lot of institutions, heritage institutions in Switzerland. So the team is made of 7 people from 3 institutions. So the GameLab UNIL, so this is in Lausanne, so it's people from game studies background and academic background. There is Eleanor from Atelier 40A in Bern, which she has a restoration background in media and audiovisual media. And there are 2 people from Musée Bolo, which is the Swiss Museum for Computer Science and Video Games. And I was part of the Musée Bolo last year, but I left, and now I'm working as an independent on Pixelvetica project. Just let me change something for the presentation, which will make it a bit easier to go through. The objectives of the project that was given by Memoriav is to evaluate the situation in Switzerland in cultural heritage institutions. So, are there any video games? How they are handled? Are there any video games that are actively being collected in those institutions? So, archives, libraries, galleries, and museums. And identify which are the needs of those institutions related to video game preservation, and to give some recommendations and guidelines to help video game preservation. So as you've seen, the slides are in almost all languages possible in Switzerland, so French, German, and English sometimes. This is so yeah, we have decided to write a report. So the core outcome will be a report that will be released this summer. And the main chapters will be as the report is targeted to anyone who works in Swiss GLAM institutions and cultural heritage, we need to give some background about the video games and the relevance of video games as a cultural object. We've decided to interview a few international initiatives existing that are already preserving video games. We've made a survey of Swiss institutions to identify which one have video games, what they are doing with those video games. We will give very large recommendations, and we will have one case study that is still going on preserving, on working on one Swiss video game. So yeah, the target of the report will be the people working in Swiss GLAMs, and obviously Memoriav and the policymakers in Switzerland that will decide if any money should be invested and funding initiatives about video game preservation. So yeah, the first that's a very quick slide about what's a video game. So video game, obviously, one of the main characteristic is immersive and interactivity, which is also something that makes it very different from other works and audiovisual works. So this is something that must be, obviously, we need to push. And the interactivity creates challenges for preservation and the obviously, we can preserve the hardware, the software, and everything around it, or we can try to have different approaches and try to document the experience of the players. We can try to simulate the experience, and emulation can be also something that can be used to reproduce the interactivity with the game without having the actual hardware and software. And so that's the first point. Obviously, context is very important, and the video game is as an industry has a lot of actors and a lot of material that is produced. And preserving video game also means that we want to preserve the context, and we need to explore not only the game but also anything that's around the game. Obviously, social impact, and so it's very broad subject. Gameplay and rules in the game are also an important part of documenting and preserving the game experience, and alternative cultures and other ways of approaching the game, emerging rules that can appear for people playing with the games. So very broad subject, and obviously we want to prove to the people working in Swiss GLAMs that preserving video games is not only a question and an issue of preserving software, but also something broader than anyone can obviously work on, not only people working in digital archival. Quick reminder, so a video game is almost free. It's free object, so it's you need the hardware to run the game. So you need a computer machine, you need a display, you need interaction controllers to interact with the game. You need the software that's usually on a media, and obviously there's the whole context of how the game is produced, how the game is perceived and received, and how the players are building communities around games. Challenges with all this, with some of the objects, so hardware and software, is that they are obviously time will make it more and more difficult to preserve the hardware and the software because degradation will happen, and we will see some media can become quite difficult to maintain. Hardware can broke, and then you need to fix it, and at some point you might run out of material to and components to repair it. So how do you maintain all those three aspects in time, and what's the strategy you want to adopt for preserving video games? We want to in this report, we want to present the fact that video game, in some sense, can be very close to time-based media art, and there's a lot of questions that are already been discussed in time-based media art that can be applied to video games. The fact that, in some sense, a video game is some sort of installation, and preserving installation has been an issue in and a topic in a lot of modern art institutions, and we should start first by looking at what has been done in those communities before creating or trying to approach the subject in a new way. A quick reminder of the fact that there are several and different kinds of video games. So we've decided to separate in 4 categories, which is is mostly related to the fact how the games have been distributed or how the game have been approached by the players. So we've got the arcade, which is a whole. It's an installation, so you've got a cabinet, you've got screen, you've got everything that's in one place that's been usually sold to cafes or to arcade rooms, and so the players were usually playing just putting coins and playing in the games in those places. Then home video games started, which the players were buying separately the console or the computer and the game. So it started to become an industry with different so you had people making the machines, people making the games, and people making obviously the separate TV, which makes it very different because everyone will have different TVs, everyone will have different experience of the game depending on what setup they will have at home. And then you have the online games, which make it obviously much more difficult to preserve because there's part of the game which is not accessible to the players directly, but is on the server side. So how do you preserve an online game when there's a server side? And there's the Steam games, which are games with no media, so where you only download the games through the internet. And how do you preserve games which are no media attached and are not sold in usual stores? How do you preserve that? And that's obviously much more related to digital archival and how do you preserve data on the long term, and how do you maintain it so that you can make it run in the future. As I said, video game can be seen as an installation. Here are 2 examples. So on the well, you can see on the left or right, I don't really know which way it would be for you, but you can see there's the Boktai video game that was released by Konami on Game Boy Advance, which used a solar sensor on the cartridge, which obviously makes it very, very different from a lot of games because the experience of the game involves you being exposed to the sunlight to charge some power for the game, and then you can use that power, and when it's run out, you have to go back outside to get more power from the sunlight. This kind of cartridge is not easy it makes it more difficult. It's not only software, but it's also hardware, so the 2 are interlinked. So if you want to preserve the experience of the game and for the gamers to experience the way the game was designed, obviously you have to get into much more details and much more challenging, complex setups. And you can see on the other part of the screen, Vectrex was a console released in the 80s, 90s, and the Vectrex was using a plastic overlay. So with the game, you had a plastic piece of plastic paper, plastic sheet that you had to put over the screen so that you will have basically the landscape and some of the art of the game was on this plastic overlay. So obviously, as a museum or as an archive, if you need to preserve the game, you need to preserve this plastic piece of sheet, and this obviously preserving plastic is a whole challenge, but it's very different from preserving software or consoles or computers. So it's a whole installation, modern art kind of issue and challenge. And there's the issues of obsolescence. So a lot of media used for video games for consoles and computers are using different kinds of media. So we have floppy disk, then we had optical media. We had different kinds of optical media that were proprietary and specific to game consoles or computers. So obviously those media are quite difficult to read. The way to find readers and drives to read those are not easy for anyone who wants to do game preservation. You have the fact that even if you have everything to read them, sometimes there will be damage to the data because there's damage on the physical layer on the media. And this picture you can see obviously a CD that's has been that will be very challenging to read, and on the right you can see the image of a floppy disk that also has errors, reading errors when we were trying to preserve it, and the red part indicates that the data was not possible to read the data on this floppy disk, which means if this is a unique floppy disk, that you've lost quite a lot of data on the floppy disk. And as I said, there's the context around the video game that is not hardware and software, but is everything that's documents that have been used for production, pre-production, concept arts, anything related to the promotion of the video game. So obviously the ads, the press kits and everything, how the game was received. So you will have articles in the press, articles online now about the video game, and you will have anything related to the communities that will be built around a game, how the game has been received by players and how players are now interactive with the games. For example, speedrunners will love to try to find a way of finishing the game as fast as possible. So that's also something that if you want to preserve the whole work, you need to think about everything that's related outside of the game that brings context to the work. And we've made this, so it's still in French, it's still a work in progress, but we are trying to identify each agent or actors in this big industry of video games and everything that's been produced by them. So if they are producing so actual games, but also anything related to promotion and if there are any articles related to that have been published. So in a way that we can identify and show to people that want to preserve games that they can actually help in the large task of preserving games by maybe preserving only one part of it. So if someone wants to preserve only the internal articles or the press articles, then they can focus on this, and this can be part of their whole broader mission of preserving anything that's related to press. And then in a subset of what they are doing, they are actually helping the preservation of video games. So as I said, we interviewed quite a lot of international institutions. So we went to see some people in France, in Japan, in Sweden, in Italy, in Germany, Canada, Australia, United States. And basically what we are trying to do is to ask all of them what are the main challenges, what has been what will be needed if you want to develop a bit further the preservation of video games. So do you like funding? Do you like tools? Do you like skilled people? And so we are still going through and we are still finishing the interview. So I cannot give you clear answers, but everyone is basically saying that the main issues are that obviously funding, but that's something that I think everyone is facing. one of the main issues that a lot of institutions are working and feel that they are working in their own environment alone, and they want a broader exchange with the others and some kind of federation of all these initiatives. And also a lot of issues with skills and tools that are lacking. This is a very young medium, and they're lacking a lot of tools to preserve it properly. Also, because the industry is it's not always cooperating and giving the tools to the cultural heritage institutions to do their work. So this is a broad subject. Is the industry really helping or preventing preservation of video games? As I said, we've made a survey of 214 organizations. So we went to all the GLAMs, but we extended also to TV channels, big private Swiss private companies, because they might have produced video games in their history. We sent it via email. We just sent one follow-up. Basically, the email was asking people to fill up a Google form with 81 questions on 7 big chapters and themes, and it was translated in 4 languages, and we managed to get 72 answers, so it's a 33% success rate, which is quite good for such a survey. And we only had 15 institutions that replied that they had video games in their archives and collections, which is 7% of the whole institutions that we targeted. A very quick, so it's still also a work in progress, but basically we had some feedback on what is most needed and what are the recommendations most needed. So the most needed, what is most needed by all this institution is to have a skill center in Switzerland to be able to ask questions, or a skill center that will be developing skills for professionals or developing new tools. A preservation guide, and this is related to recommendations. So a guide that will help them figure out how they can help the broader effort of preserving video games. Obviously, if you start to describe games and have a catalog, having a metadata and indexing model for everyone that can be shared. And this is also something that we had as an international, when we were doing the interviews at international level, a lot of people were saying we want to be able to share our data about what we have discovered and which game we are preserving. Some of them were replying that they would like a specific institution in Switzerland that will be dedicated to video games. For example, I work for the Swiss National Film Archive, and they think that something related like a Swiss video game archive should be created. Some other institutions would prefer to have an institution that will be a skill center only, and then each institution will still have their own collection, but they will be able to ask questions and maybe outsource some of the more challenging tasks to a central institution. Here again, we have the idea of a network dedicated to video game issues, so a place where we can discuss about these issues nationally, at least, and probably internationally. And also conferences and exhibitions about how to preserve video games, and obviously funding, which is a never-ending issue in any cultural environment or academic environment. And the recommendation most needed is basically recommendation for digital archiving, technical and technical descriptive metadata, a catalog of Helvetica video games, because a lot of institutions were not able to say if they had Swiss games or not, so which is also very important, because identifying a game as Helvetica will probably help some institutions to have funding, because as usual, national works, national treasures are a bit easier to find funding than international. Recommendation about physical archiving. So how do you preserve in the best way all those media, and presentation on the history of video games in Switzerland, which is also quite a new field. And a large portion of the institutions do not have knowledge of any other institutions that are preserving video games. So we can see also that people are basically alone. They don't really know if anyone else has the same issue, and they don't really know what to do with those issues, which is something that we've been hearing quite a lot, which is also the point of the whole Pixelvetica project, is to be able to show everyone that's basically a national issue now, and we can start talking about it together. And that's the end of my presentation.